Welcome to Improv Your Parenting, the art of turning parenting into play. Today we're joined by Deana Criess. Deana has been a professional improviser for more than 25 years. A master instructor, director, and performer, Deana has been featured at festivals, Fortune 500 companies, and colleges and theaters all over the country and world. She currently tours with her trio, Slumber Party, is a member of Nightwings, a completely improvised musical shown in the dark, and an improvised Sondheim show. Deana's work has been featured across global media. She's also worked with the biggest names in comedy and so many other incredible people along the way. When she's not touring, Deana works as an applied improv specialist at Perkins School for the Blind, where she uses improv to teach professional and life skills to staff and students. You can learn more about Deana and her work at deanacriess.com. Deana, thank you so much for joining us on Improv Your Parenting podcast.
It is so fun to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start this off the way I start off every episode, which is asking you one simple question. How do you interact with kids, and what role does improv play in that interaction?
I love that you think that's a simple question. I'll answer this in both a professional and personal way, if I may. My current job is at a place called Perkins School for the Blind, which is the oldest school for the blind in the country, second oldest in the world. And my job there is basically applied improv specialist. So I get to work with our staff and our students using improv as a way to teach job skills, socialization skills, all kinds of things, all the things we know improv can teach.
Wow.
So in my day job, I'm interacting with children with disabilities of all ages. Our school serves everything from infants up to folks who are 22. And then we have a program for young adults, teaching them job skills. I'm working with young people who have multiple disabilities, and improv is the way that I approach that work, right? It's all about meeting them where they are, helping them make connections with each other, and helping them find their voice. Students with disabilities are not often invited into conversation, both literally and metaphorically.
Yeah.
And improv is a great way to help them figure out who they are and what do they think is funny and where do they like to connect with people. I run a class right now called Comedy Club, which is literally just, we spend an hour talking about what they think is funny. They get to bring stuff that they think is fun or funny. We obviously improvise in the moment. Some of them use alternate communication devices. So we'll program devices with them. We'll write setups and punchlines to jokes that they can then push buttons on their devices so that they can tell jokes to other people. It's really magical thing. So that's how I'm interacting with kids in my professional life. In my personal life, I have two kids. They're now adults. And I grew up in theater, started doing improv in college a little bit, but then started taking classes when I was 30. So that's pretty old for improv. I was the oldest person in the room. I was like, oh, what am I doing? But what I realized in the first class was the goofy make-em-up games that we're playing here, I can take home and play with my 3 and 5-year-old. Well, actually, they were even younger at the time. But yeah, it was for me like instant connection. At the time, I was working as a preschool teacher. So I was like, I can bring these into work. Became the professional track of my improv brain that was like,
Wow.
This can be everything. With my kids, it absolutely made me a better parent. I'll pat myself on the back and say before that, I thought I was a really connected parent, the kind of parent who gets on the floor and plays with kids and we're always reading. So it's not like I didn't spend time with them before, but what improv unlocked for me was the idea of meeting them where they were and seizing on the moments when they were showing interest in something, putting aside my agenda for what I thought we should be doing and really just being aware of those moments. When you see a child get excited about something, we should be absolutely staying in that moment with them. Why are we moving past that to get to the next thing, right? If you're loving playing with this Play-Doh, let's stay playing with this Play-Doh until you're not loving it anymore. And if you see a butterfly and that's fascinating to you, let's chase that butterfly and talk about butterflies. It sounds silly to a family that really loves structure. And definitely one of my kids needed structure. He got very nervous if things weren't going according to plan. And this to me became a great teaching tool for him to help him get used to the idea of veering off from your plan can actually be really valuable. And yes, we should have a plan. We're safe here. This isn't chaos. We can choose when to deviate, right? So they were just raised with this idea that we make this choice now and we can make a different choice next. And they were raised with the idea that play is the thing. It's not a placeholder till we get to learning. Play is learning. Play is relationship. And they're 21 and 23 now. And play is still a huge part of what we do as a family. So it's a lot of board games, and they grew up as theater kids. It just became the language of how they were raised. Yes, and is as close to a religion as we have in our family.
Love it. Wow. So you have so many different facets of this that you're bringing to the table. Let's start with the recognition when you were in the improv classes of I could bring this home,
Yeah.
the kids, and I could take this to school.
Mhm.
What was it about what you were doing that you thought this might be handy in other places than just in this class?
Yeah. I hope that everyone has experienced this in their improv classes. But the idea that we have to be in this moment, there is no place else we can be. We can't be up here thinking about whatever it is we carry around with us all the time. I'm not good enough, or I'm going to be terrible at this, or I shouldn't have
Mm.
come here, or I have to do grocery shopping after, like the whatevers that we carry. From that very first class, I was like, oh, we have to be right here, because if we're not, we're missing it. Like,
Yeah.
we will not be able to track if we're not right here. So it was that. And then the fact that all these disparate adults who had never met were suddenly within minutes having the time of our lives, like just the
Yeah.
unuttered joy that it unlocked if you let it. And so for me, it was like driving home. Yeah, I was living in the suburbs. I was a new mom. So I'm driving home in my minivan, literally my mom van. And just like the joy that I had was like, I just
Mm.
feel like that's how I wanted to feel all the time for them, for the two kids that I'm in charge of. So like, what if we did that? What if we just did that? And then the next day being at work in the preschool, which was a program for children with autism spectrum disorder and their peer models. It was designed for, helping children with ASD socialize and things like that. And I was like, I just met a bunch of people last night and we were connected within a few minutes. What if I tried some of these things? It was literally just me trying it without knowing whether that was a thing, anything
Yeah.
was doing, but
Yeah.
felt like it can't hurt, right? And then to see that being successful was like, well, okay. What we'll learn next week at improv
Okay.
school. So it was honestly just wanting to continue that feeling of connection and joy and being so in the moment that you can put everything else down. Wouldn't that be a joyful place to live all the time?
Yes. You mentioned that through doing that, you realize you are a better parent than you would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
What criteria or sort of where do you see that? How does that show up?
Yeah. And I will say there's an infinite number of ways to parent. So I'm definitely not saying if you aren't an improviser, then
Oh,
you're
no.
well,
Why not?
although no. I the main shift for me was the idea of recognizing moments and putting everything else down. As a new parent, when I started taking improv classes, I had a 3-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. It was overwhelming. And I signed up for that improv class because I needed something for me. I just needed 2 hours. That was for me, not because I didn't love being a mom or I didn't love them. I just was like, I don't know who I am outside of this anymore. That was seeping in. I was holding a lot of stress. While I was on the floor playing with them, acting out episodes of Sesame Street with our puppets, I was still carrying a lot of this stress and anxiety into those moments too. And I think I do a very good job of masking. I think kids are really good at feeling that.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest shift was instead of play being a thing that I knew I had to do for their development and should be fun for us, the mind shift made it actually fun for all of us and for me, and really did build those connections that it's supposed to, but it won't do that if you can't just sort of put everything else down.
And so as your kids were growing up, the way you interacted with them, the kinds of play that you did would shift and evolve. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that evolution?
Yeah, for sure. Without getting too nerdy and scientific, there are like stages of the development of play. I think every parent understands, like, oh, okay, well, they're not really connecting with me, they're playing next to me. I'm going to model for them and they're going to do it. When they were babies, it was certainly a lot of that. Just instinctively, and because of who I am as a person, was like, it's a million voices and there's books and puppets. And it was all sort of that imaginative play. And then as they got older and they could play with each other and really start to request types of play, that was the most exciting thing. Remembering moments of them asking for play would like, oh, we've already done it. We've done a job getting them to the point where they could choose, it's going to be Play-Doh or it's going to be puppets or it's going to be books or it's going to be outside or whatever. And really learning to follow that and saying yes when we can, which is sort of the basis of improvisation. People get nervous when you talk about improv and parenting
Mm,
because they know enough about improv to know yes and. I think people, well, you can't say yes to your kids all the time. Of course you can't. That's dangerous. Can't let your kid do everything they want. That's not being their parent. And to me, yes and isn't about saying yes all the time. It's about saying yes when you can and
mhm.
shifting your mindset so that no is a purposeful choice. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of parents default to no, and not because they're bad parents. There's a lot going on in our lives and there's a lot of stress. So no becomes the crutch. So
yeah,
shifting that to yes so that we can say, yes, I know, like you do want to stay at the playground. Me too, guy. I would love to stay here. And we have to get to the next thing. So let's pick a time now so that we can come back. Like
exactly.
those little things are how yes and becomes a great tool for not just play, but for parenting overall. I think as they got older and they were able to, that's where it came from, is that them being able to ask for play is a gift, but also a challenge because you can't always say yes to everything. So for me, it was about finding ways to say yes to what we could. So
Mm,
you want to play, we can't play that right now. Let's play this. Or you want to go to the playground. I can't go to the playground right now. We can still play. Finding ways to say yes. And that play certainly shifting to then including friends as they got older. And, what does a yes and birthday party look like? Or, what does yes and look like on a playground? And
yeah.
being mindful of including other people so they understand that kind of play. Like I said, they're adults now, and it's still a huge part of their lives.
I want to get into that in terms of how they have taken what you seeded with them and turned that into portions of who they are. What does that look like without revealing too much about the individuals? But what have they done with that in their experience?
Well, as I mentioned, both of them grew up as theater kids, which is
Yeah.
not something that I pushed them to do. I did what a lot of parents do, which is sign them up for everything to see what they like. Neither of them loved formal dance classes or sports. The thing they leaned toward was play, and that becomes theater, right? I guess it could become sports. For them, it became theater. So they certainly grew up as theater kids. My son, we joke that because I also used to run a nonprofit. I helped run a nonprofit theater and I ran their comedy school because I had small kids and I needed a place for them to go. I created a youth program. So it was like, oh, we should have an after school program for kids. We should have we should have a summer program for kids. So they literally grew up doing improv, both at home and out in the world. My friends who were teachers in the program used to joke they're going to rebel by the age where they hate improv. Their rebellion was both of them by the end of middle school were like, we're going to do scripted theater. Oh no. Right. And big rebellion was we're going to do musical theater instead of improv.
The other side of the
So it really was a part of their upbringing. People
um,
say it takes a village to raise a child. And I always joke that in my case, it took a comedy theater because those people literally helped raise my kids. One of them now is a teacher. So he teaches high school and he absolutely credits his improv background with being able to connect with his students in the moment and follow those learning moments that they're open to. You have your lesson plan, but being able to put it down to give those students what they need, I think is a huge part of what makes him good at what he does. And then his sister, my daughter, is studying to be what is called a child life specialist. It's essentially, in Europe, they call them play therapists.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We love that.
A child life specialist in the US is someone who's usually embedded in a hospital. They create a sort of prescriptive play for kids who are in the emergency room, staying in the hospital, or even living in the hospital. It's all about developing play for them that will help them through whatever they're going through. She's going to take the things she grew up learning and apply it in a very meaningful way. And I'm trying not to cry when I do.
Very good. So thank you.
It's just like,
Wow.
yeah, taking this silly thing and it became the core of who they are. And now they're figuring out how to share that with the world in their own unique ways, which is pretty great.
Is incredible. How you talked a little bit about finding ways to use yes and even when you needed to do safety and, kind of like we have to have dinner, stuff like that,
Mhm,
where,
mhm.
they're still being a parent. Were there times in which you were dealing with power struggles or utter conflict that you were able to use it to diffuse a situation?
The amount of times we always joked when they were growing up, they still talk about it. There's something they call the mom voice, which is only for safety. It would only come out when we are in a parking lot. The rest of the time, it really was a much intentional approach. It's not like I was a pushover, but it was very intentional. When we were in conflict, conversations would get us back to being in a positive space, right? Which doesn't mean I gave into what they wanted. It just meant we could reframe it into a space of positive conversation because we love each other. We are family. And so it goes back to the very basic idea of what can we agree to? And so it's bedtime. You don't want to go to bed. I agree. Like, I agree that you don't want to go to bed. I agree that this feels unfair to you. I totally hear you. Right. And if you don't go to bed, here's what's going to happen. Let's talk through all the things that are going to happen. What happens when you don't get enough sleep?
Right.
Let's talk through that. Really just allowing it to be a conversation rooted in positivity and support, because that's essentially what improv is. Let's support one another. So, how can I support this 2-year-old in a meltdown right now?
Which is hard.
It is hard. And, you know, everyone who's never had a kid, gone to the Target or whatever store and seen the kid melt down and they're like, I would never. Yeah. With
Yeah.
that scenario, they should let you know the moment you decide to become a parent, you will end up in a store with a
Yeah.
screaming child. How you handle that is up to you and ignore everyone else. But I do think we were able to get through those moments faster because of my improv training
Mhm.
than a parent who just didn't have those skills, right? Which again doesn't mean they love their kid less or that they're a bad parent. I wish every parent could just get a really quick, like, can I just sit with you for 3 hours and give you some tips that will help you get through the next lifetime because you'll be parenting these kids forever?
If you had 3 hours with a new parent,
Yeah.
what would you instill to them that they could be that parent in Target and be okay?
First, I would like to give them comforting tea and warm blankets, give them a moment to decompress. And then I think, I've thought a lot about like, because I've done like baby and caregiver improv groups and toddler and parent improv groups. If I could distill that into 3 hours, I just think this will help you be open to where they are, actually be there, try to put aside whatever else is going on. And if you're a person who loves calendars and you need to structure that times, do that.
Mm.
Be in the moment with them. Get on the floor. It's invaluable to engage in physical play in any way you can. Some people can't get on the floor. That's fine. What is a different way to do that? Finding agreement wherever you can. It's not saying yes to everything, but being open to the idea that no should be an intentional choice and yes should be your default. And what does that mean for you and your family?
How to use all that.
Yeah, because I think it's impossible to hear it and apply it without having it modeled for you and seeing it work.
Yeah. Tell me about a time you had to apply this where you were struggling with your kid and it's like, okay, in this moment, I have a choice and I'm going to make this choice, which is going to hopefully help resolve this. Do you have any
Well,
examples?
just one. I will say this, it's not one specific thing that jumps out, but there was a moment, I think my son was in kindergarten. He was not having a good experience with his teacher there was a lot of school refusal. He didn't want to go. I also worked at that school in the classroom across the hall. So he would try to escape to come to my classroom. We had to have a lot of talks about like, what is, what can we say yes to here? Like, I need to stop. His teacher was like, this is where you have to be. You need to listen to me as kindergarten teacher. It was really difficult to, as a parent, turn him away from the door when he's standing there. So being able to, in the moment, be both a professional person who works in that place and his mother, and being able to say, yes, I know you're struggling right now. I get it. Like, this is really hard. I understand. Tell me about what specifically is going on right now that's making you not want to be in that room. And then let's figure out how we can make it okay for you to get back in there. I think just creating the space for him to share and being able to talk constructively and positively with his teacher, it's a skill you need for your kids. It's also a skill you need to work with every person that's part of your child's team for the rest of their lives. Those are teachers, they're doctors. At a school, it's not just the one kindergarten teacher, it's also all the other people that work there and the administration. Being able to have those conversations in a positive and productive way and not just run across the hall and fling the door open and say, what did you do to my kid?
Yeah. Right.
Which is
Oh,
difficult.
yes.
But I think, again, to be able to go back to, okay, what I know in my core is we're on the same team here. She wants a successful school day. If nothing else, right? Maybe
Yes.
she and I are not locked in on she wants Jackson to have a great day, but she does want him to not run out of the room because that's disruptive. So, like, just finding those little places where she and I could meet and he and I could meet to get it back on track. Those were conversations we had every day
I know.
for a school year
Wow.
until he didn't have her as a teacher anymore.
Great lesson for him as well. And I don't know how much of it he picked up on at that age versus over time, being able to talk through those really challenging situations and you have big emotions.
Right. Your big emotions aren't the problem.
Yeah.
I think we often mistakenly or purposefully tell kids that their feelings aren't valid or that their feelings aren't for this moment or that they're right. Be quiet or you're fine.
Hear that a lot.
Thing we hear a lot. That's a parenting style
Yeah.
to just sort of, you're okay, you're fine. That didn't hurt. Brush it off. Like, it's not a big deal. All of that stacks up to teach a kid that their feelings are invalid. If you can instead say, I hear you, listen to them. I understand you are in pain right now. What I also know is the kid stubs his toe and everyone's like, you're fine. Like, this feels really bad. And someone has to say anything. Like,
Exactly.
what if instead we were like, I know, right? It hurts so much when you stub your toe. Here's the good news. It won't hurt in a minute. So
Yeah.
let's just sit with that until it passes.
Yeah.
What if we could give them the space to feel their feelings? Wouldn't we all then raise better adjusted adults?
That's the dream, right? Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
I mean, it's not for everyone. For it was certainly mine to be like,
It's mine as well.
one to regulate their own emotions. Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, it'd be
Um,
glorious.
And I think the other thing people misunderstand about improv and this kind of approach to parenting, me having that conversation with him or my daughter as a toddler isn't me regulating their emotions. It's me allowing them space to regulate their own emotions. So while it can seem like you're always coaching them through things, like how are they ever going to learn to do it on their own? What we're actually teaching them is how to be problem solvers, right? Which
Yes.
is the other thing that improv is so good at teaching. It may seem like if you're leading that conversation, you're solving the problem for them. The opposite is actually true. I'm trying never to give my solutions opinions. I'm trying to say, like, what do you think in this moment? How are you feeling? And when I do have information that I think is helpful, I'm certainly not withholding it. That would be weird. Um, but I'm again like it's not a demand. It's not like you have to take this. Here's what I think. I think you're gonna be okay. And here's how I know that. Here's
Yeah.
all the evidence I have to support that you will be fine. And really letting them, sort of work their way through it. Again, it's all improv.
It is. And you talked about that experience in the school, and they from there, it sounds like you've been in schools for most of your professional career. And so tell me about what it is you do in the schools now and sort of how you got to that place where you're using applied improv every day with the kids you're working with.
Yeah. So I'll jump back to that improv class, my first improv class, where by week 3, I was like, oh, this is my life now. And I was already a preschool teacher. And that program, because it was a program for students diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, they were really open to a lot of new approaches. And so I was able to go to that director and say, hey, here's what I think. Can I try this stuff? She was so great about saying, yeah, as long as it's not hurting anyone, let's give it a shot. It ended up being a really effective tool. As my kids started in their school journeys, I was realizing it could have applications in any school. The place where I was taking classes ended up hiring me to run their comedy school. We built a youth program and a school based program. I created improv programming that we could send into a school for bullying prevention. There was a program that was really around encouraging creativity and collaboration. That one was called the 4 C's: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication. Then there was one that was for younger kids that was called, I think, like Your Totally Made Up Comedy Show. And it was basically like just showing them that their ideas could lead to incredible things. That's how I got into working sort of full-time professionally in the sort of academic space. And at the same time, we were developing classes for high school students and doing stuff in colleges as well. I got this email from a former student back in 2017 who was like, hey, I work at Perkins School for the Blind. We're looking to figure out if improv can do something here. So would you come and talk to our president? I went and talked to him. He came from the business side and was a Perkins parent. He knew of improv as a tool for innovation, which is great. He was really excited about the applications it could have for staff. And I was like, great. Also, it can have these other effects and use cases with students. I was supposed to be there to help them write curriculum for one specific project, and I was supposed to be there for 6 weeks. Instead, they built a job for me, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, gosh.
I never thought, and I was raised, my mom was a special education teacher her entire career.
Uh-huh.
So she used to bring my sister and I to class with her on the days that like we had off, and we would volunteer in her classroom. I grew up knowing there was this whole other idea of education that really was trying to tap into what these kids could do. Perkins is all about the idea that every child can learn. And to me, that just spoke so deeply to my heart. Every child can learn.
Yeah.
We need to meet them where they are. That's improv, right?
Yeah.
Every day I am honored to be able to do what I do. And these kids are incredible. Every single one of them is incredible. We had an assembly few months ago that was just a joke assembly. Like it's just everyone in the school come together for 45 minutes and people can just get up and tell jokes. And like, right, like what school would be like, yeah, no, we should do that. But they were like, yeah, we should do that. And just to see the joy, right? It doesn't have to be, I think people were nervous when I showed up to be like, well, but what if our students can't do improv, right? Like they're, you're going to try to teach them how to do a short form show or something. And I'm like, no, or maybe if they want to, but that's not the goal, right? The goal for me, improv is never about the product. It's about the process. If at the end of the year there's a talent show and some of them want to do something, awesome. I will be delighted to help them with that. But really, it's just about how can we learn in this moment, right? I guess it all comes back to that. How can we be in this moment? So that's my long journey of how I got from where I was to being at Perkins. I'll give full credit to the theater I was working at that had a board that was like, I don't know, try that. The school-based programming was just me saying, I had this wild idea and maybe naive idea that there's so many problems in the world. Could improv solve them? And I think the answer is yes. So they were letting me do all kinds of stuff. I was doing work with domestic abuse survivors. I was doing work with brain tumor survivors. Like basically, if I heard of a thing in Boston that had a population that I felt like improv could help, the board was super supportive and I could basically make phone calls, get the right partners and do these workshops.
What an incredible opportunity to test it in different domains
Yeah.
and
Yes.
see, can it stick here? Can it be
Mhm.
used? And
Yeah.
did you actually find that it was across domains, or were there somewhere, nope, didn't fit here?
I haven't found a population yet that I felt like this isn't the right fit. And that
Yeah,
may be because instinctively I'm not reaching out to those kinds of, I don't know. I think the key when you're working with specific populations is to get the right partners. So as I was building bullying prevention training, it wasn't just me as a mom and an improviser saying, let's do these things. It
yeah,
started as that. And then before we got into the schools, I worked with child psychologists, therapists, and educators to say, can I vet this with you? What would you add to make sure, do no harm, right? I don't want to go in there and do bits and then these kids are left worse than where I found them. And the stuff that we were doing in hospitals, we were partnering with doctors and therapists and child life specialists to say, how can we be impactful in this work? So I do think improv can save the world as long as we're recruiting the right partners to do it.
I think that is absolutely beautiful. And it sounds like from what we've talked about, you've taken all of these lessons, experiences, all of your work in schools with your family, and you're writing a book about it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it has taken many different forms. When they were little, I was like, "Oh, I need to write a book right now about improv for toddlers." But then you don't have time because you have two
Yeah.
toddlers. So, and we'll spend time while we're doing that. So it's funny. I was recently going back and looking at all of my handwritten notes from every stage of their life because now I finally with their adults. Ironically, now I have the time to actually work to get it more solidly built. I was going through all of those notes from different phases of their lives and realized, oh, it's the 5 developmental stages of play. Got it.
Yeah.
Previous versions were maybe each chapter is about a different short form game as a metaphor, and it was all becoming very convoluted. No one knows what that book is or wants to read it. So this version we're currently working on is rooted in the 5 developmental stages of play. I say we because my daughter had the idea of working on it with me. So
Wow.
now she and I are writing it together, which I mean, the tears of joy that I in our family, we call it a mommy moment when I'm so overwhelmed by the idea of them being my child that I can't more and I cry. So I had a big mommy moment where she was like, what if we work on it together and I'll bring in everything I'm learning in my classes. She's like, I think it would be interesting to hear my perspective as a child who went through that. And I was like, because I could talk all day long, but to hear from a child who was raised that way and how that maps to what she's doing professionally is what will make this different. There's certainly a lot of books out there on improv, and we should be handing them out at hospitals when people are giving birth. So that's the approach we're taking. She's overseas now, but our goal is that when she gets back in May, I'm going to start to rewrite with the idea of including her in the conversation.
Very cool. That
Yeah.
is so beautiful. Well, when you are farther along, I would love to have both of you on at that point and maybe have a conversation with the two of you and get her perspective as well and what you're working on and how that's developing, because I think that would be an incredible conversation.
Yeah, she's a delight. It'll be interesting to hear her answers.
That's not how I saw it.
Like, you thought you were giving me freedom to feel my feeling. I hope that's true. Yeah, I think I'm going to learn a lot about myself as a parent this summer as we get into these sort of
Wow.
conversations.
What an incredible experience to be able to have with your kid, to be able to then go back through and be like, here's what worked, here's what didn't.
And I have all these notes of some of them are specific to oh, this thing just happened. I'm going to jot it down. Some of it obviously she won't remember from when she was very little, but I'll be interested to hear her perspective on all of it. What I perceived versus what she was feeling may be entirely different. And I think that will be really valuable. So,
So,
yeah.
well, Dina, thank you so much for this conversation, for the work you're doing. I'm enthralled with what you've done, with what you're doing, with what you're going to do with your daughter. And I really look forward to talking to you again, meeting her, and learning about her experience through all of what we just talked about.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like those of us in this community, the people who believe in it all the things that improv can be. It's just such a wonderful community to be a part of. I am so excited when I get to meet people like you who are so in sync with that idea. I really appreciate you having the conversation today.